August 15, 1944. The early morning fog clung to the rolling hills of Normandy like a ghost, and the faint scent of damp earth mixed with the acrid smoke of abandoned German positions. You can almost hear the crunch of wet boots against mud, the low hum of tanks idling in the distance, and the anxious murmur of radio operators waiting for orders. Somewhere behind the front, General George S. Patton, his leather gloves gripping the reins of his jeep, rode like a tempest itself, impatient, relentless, unstoppable. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D Eisenhower watched from his command tent, maps strewn across the table, pens tapping, officers whispering strategies. He had seen Patton before in North Africa and Sicily, but this was different. Reports from the front spoke of tanks tearing through German lines, infantry units pushing past fortified positions that were supposed to slow them for days. Eisenhower frowned, the weight of responsibility pressing down. Could Patton's relentless drive really be controlled, or was it a powder keg waiting to explode? You could almost feel Eisenhower's hesitation. Every map, every marker, every carefully plotted route had been designed for caution, for balance. Yet Patton ignored them, moving at a speed that defied expectations. His Third Army wasn't just advancing, it was annihilating resistance with surgical precision. Roads that intelligence predicted would be contested for weeks were cleared in hours. Entire German battalions seemed to vanish before the Third Army's onslaught, leaving behind a trail of wrecked vehicles, abandoned supplies, and stunned prisoners. Patton himself seemed to feed off the chaos. His staff officers sprinted to keep up, clutching clipboards and field radios, shouting coordinates. The smell of diesel and gunpowder hung heavy in the morning air as Sherman tanks rumbled past hedgerows, their tracks chewing through mud, cannons poised like predatory eyes. Soldiers whispered stories of Patton's near-mythical speed, how he appeared where he was least expected, rallying men personally, issuing orders that seemed almost reckless until they worked. Eisenhower stared at the reports, eyes narrowing. The man's audacity was undeniable, but what did it mean for the greater strategy? Could one man's daring upset months of careful planning? Could a single lightning strike, no matter how brilliant, be trusted to hold a front? Then came the first radio call. A staff officer's voice crackled with urgency, a breakthrough at Avranches. Entire German lines had been pierced. Panzer divisions were retreating in disarray, the famed 7th Army's defenses collapsing. Patton's audacity wasn't just working, it was rewriting the rules of engagement. Eisenhower leaned back, his mind racing. Was this brilliance or madness? And then, across the battlefield, a lone German officer stared at the advancing columns, disbelief etched across his face. He had been trained to predict Allied movements, to anticipate caution. But Patton had no interest in caution. He moved like a storm. Eisenhower's hand hovered over the map. The realization was creeping in slow, like a tide washing over a cliff. This was no ordinary advance. This was revolutionary. And yet, the question remained. Could anyone survive when the storm itself was Patton? The sun climbed higher over Normandy, burning off the mist and revealing the devastation left in Patton's wake. Hedgerows riddled with shell craters, villages half destroyed, and the eerie silence of roads cleared of enemy fire. It was a battlefield transformed in a matter of days. You could almost feel the tension, the nerves of soldiers who had been told to expect a grueling slog, now marching alongside tanks that seemed to move faster than any map could track. Patton's strategy was as audacious as it was unorthodox. Where other generals measured every mile, calculated every risk, he tore through enemy lines with a combination of speed, deception, and psychological pressure. Infantry followed armor like shadows, artillery rained down preemptive fire, and reconnaissance units darted ahead, eyes sharp for the slightest hint of German resistance. Even the Luftwaffe's sporadic attacks were met with relentless counterfire, a symphony of chaos conducted with terrifying precision. Meanwhile, Eisenhower's officers gathered in tense clusters around the command tent, faces pale, voices hushed. "This can't last," one muttered, eyes glued to the maps. "He's overextending." Another countered, "If it works, we take Germany faster than we ever imagined." But Eisenhower himself remained silent, watching as reports poured in faster than he could track them. Every hour, Patton defied expectation. Every report from the front seemed impossible. Tanks that should have been bogged down in mud were cutting through forests. German lines that were predicted to hold for days crumbled in mere hours. And then came the word from Avranches. The Third Army had encircled a large German force, cutting off retreat routes and capturing over 10,000 prisoners. Officers at Eisenhower's side exchanged stunned glances. This was no longer just a risky gamble. This was a tactical masterstroke. And yet the realization gnawed at him. The man had done it his way. No approved plans, no cautious incremental advances, just pure, relentless audacity. Patton himself didn't pause to savor the moment. He was already moving eastward, scanning the horizon for the next opportunity, issuing orders as if time itself obeyed him. You could hear the clatter of field radios, the roar of tanks, the murmur of soldiers, a living, breathing machine of war. And at its center, Patton grinning, leather gloves muddy, helmet tilted just so, daring the world to keep up. Eisenhower finally spoke, almost to himself. He's not reckless, he's inevitable. The weight of command pressed heavier than ever. Here was a general who didn't just fight the enemy. He reshaped the battlefield, rewrote the rules of movement, and forced even the highest commanders to rethink everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. And yet, for all the brilliance, a question lingered in the room. Could one man's speed and instinct hold against the entrenched defenses still ahead? Could audacity alone carry the Third Army through France and beyond? Or was the storm approaching a point where even Patton's genius might falter? August 6, 1944. The quiet French countryside erupted into chaos as Patton's Third Army surged toward Mortain. You can almost feel the tension. The dirt roads shaking under tank tracks, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air, and the constant drone of reconnaissance planes overhead. German commanders, including General Paul Hauser, stared at the reports in disbelief. They had expected a methodical advance, a grind through hedgerows. Instead, Patton was moving like lightning, flanking positions that were supposed to be impregnable. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the atmosphere was taut. Maps littered the tables, telephone lines crackling with urgent calls. "He's pushing too far," muttered one officer. Another whispered, "He's cutting supply lines. Is he overreaching?" But Eisenhower, watching the rapid dispatches from the front, felt a reluctant awe creeping in. Patton's gamble wasn't reckless, it was audacious precision. His Third Army wasn't just attacking. It was predicting, outmaneuvering, and overwhelming German defenses in a way that made every previous Allied plan look cautious, almost timid. On the front, Sherman tanks barreled past hedgerows, their crews yelling orders over the roar of engines. Infantry followed, rifles ready, eyes scanning every farmhouse and barn. Artillery units laid down suppressive fire, flattening defensive positions before the Germans could react. And Patton, mounted on a jeep, rode through it all like a conductor, pointing, shouting, daring the enemy to keep up. Every obstacle seemed temporary. Every fortified line cracked and crumbled under the force of his advance. Yet Mortain would be the ultimate test. German reinforcements, including elite panzer divisions, moved to counterattack, hopping to cut off Patton's spearhead. Intelligence officers at Eisenhower's tent held their breath as reports streamed in. The Third Army was isolated, deep behind enemy lines. This was the moment every cautious strategist feared, a potential disaster waiting to happen. But then came the miracle. Patton's coordination, lightning-fast maneuvers, and unrelenting momentum held. Encircled units were broken free, counterattacks repelled, and the German forces were thrown back. The Third Army had turned what should have been a perilous overextension into another stunning victory. Eisenhower, watching the updates, felt the full weight of realization settle in. Patton's audacity wasn't just luck, it was vision. A new form of warfare, defined by speed, aggression, and calculated risk. As the reports continued to flood in, Eisenhower finally allowed himself a rare smile. The man had defied every expectation, shattered conventional military wisdom, and in doing so, forced the Allies to see that sometimes speed and instinct could be more decisive than careful planning. But even as victory hung in the air, a nagging question lingered. Could even Patton's brilliance sustain this momentum all the way to Germany? Or was the Third Army racing toward a trap hidden just beyond the horizon? August 10, 1944. The sun beat down mercilessly on the roads leading from avalanches, dust and smoke twisting into the sky as Patton's columns tore across the French countryside. You can almost hear the rhythmic thunder of Sherman and Stuart tanks, the whine of armored vehicles racing past villages that only yesterday had been German strongholds. Soldiers scrambled to keep up, hearts pounding, adrenaline spiking, and all the while, Patton was already scanning the horizon for the next move. Eisenhower sat in his headquarters tent, maps spread like a battlefield mosaic, pens poised, officers leaning over his shoulders. Every report from the front seemed impossible. Bridges captured before demolition. German units collapsing under flanking maneuvers faster than intelligence had predicted. Supply lines stretched to their limits, and yet they held. Patton's genius wasn't in avoiding risk. It was in embracing it with precision, turning audacity into strategy. At the front, reconnaissance planes streaked across the sky, spotting retreating German columns, smoke rising from abandoned vehicles, and towns liberated almost overnight. Engineers raced to repair roads and bridges to keep the momentum, and artillery units leapfrogged forward with uncanny speed, providing continuous fire support. Infantry units, exhausted but invigorated by the pace, found themselves in positions the enemy hadn't expected, their presence reshaping the battlefield hour by hour. For Eisenhower, the realization was growing heavier with every update. This was not mere luck. It was not reckless bravado. Patton's Third Army was redefining operational tempo, proving that rapid, unpredictable movement could outflank entire armies and shatter entrenched lines before anyone had time to react. The audacity that once made planners uneasy was now creating results that defied expectation. And yet, for all the triumph, a shadow of concern remained. How far could one man's instincts carry an army across hostile territory? Could logistics, exhausted men, and unpredictable German counterattacks eventually blunt even Patton's unstoppable momentum? Or was history watching the birth of a new kind of warfare, one driven by speed, precision, and the sheer will of a single man to refuse limitation? August 12, 1944. The air in Eisenhower's tent was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and the tension of anticipation. Reports kept coming in, each one more astonishing than the last. Patton's Third Army had broken through at Le Mans, cut off German supply lines, and forced entire divisions into retreat. You could almost feel the disbelief ripple through the room. Officers exchanged incredulous glances. "It shouldn't be possible," one murmured. "He's moving faster than we can coordinate." Eisenhower leaned back in his chair, the weight of command pressing down like never before. He had seen generals follow plans to the letter, measured movements by days and weeks, yet Patton seemed to operate on instinct, audacity, and timing that no map could capture. He had doubted Patton's methods, worried about overextension, feared that this relentless pace would leave the Third Army vulnerable. But now, the evidence was undeniable. Field reports painted a cinematic picture: tanks tearing through hedgerows, artillery units leapfrogging forward without pause, infantry flanking German positions in ways previously considered impossible. Entire towns liberated in a day, enemy soldiers surrendering en masse, and panzer divisions thrown into confusion. Patton was everywhere and nowhere at once, moving like a force of nature, impossible to predict, impossible to stop. Eisenhower's mind replayed the sequence of decisions he had questioned: the rapid advance from Normandy, the audacious strike toward Avranches, the relentless push through Mortain. Each gamble had succeeded beyond expectation. The man he had once regarded as reckless was now revealing the truth. Speed, decisiveness, and boldness could achieve what careful planning often could not. And then, as the final reports from the morning came in, Eisenhower allowed himself to speak aloud, almost to the empty tent. He's not just lucky, he's redefining what it means to lead an army. For the first time, the Supreme Allied Commander felt the full weight of realization. Patton's audacity was not a risk. It was a revolution. Yet even in this moment of awe, a question lingered. Gnawing at the edges of certainty, could anyone, no matter how brilliant, sustain this pace across the rest of France and into Germany? Or was history about to test whether even Patton's genius had a limit? August 14, 1944. The morning sun burned through low-hanging clouds, illuminating a landscape scarred by weeks of relentless battle. You can almost hear the distant rumble of tanks over broken roads, the sharp crack of artillery echoing across fields, and the frantic chatter of forward observers reporting every movement. Patton's Third Army pressed on, faster than anyone could have imagined, a tidal wave of armor, infantry, and artillery that seemed unstoppable. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the realization was sinking in deeper. Every skeptic, every cautious planner, every doubter had been forced to witness the impossible. Patton had taken risks others wouldn't dream of: armored columns advancing with exposed flanks, supply lines stretched to their breaking points, assaults on heavily fortified positions that should have taken weeks. And yet, it worked. Every calculated gamble paid off. Patton himself embodied the storm. Boots mudded, helmet tilted at a rakish angle, leather gloves clenched around the reins of his jeep. He moved from unit to unit, shouting orders, inspecting positions, and driving his men forward with a ferocity that seemed almost supernatural. Sherman tanks tore through hedgerows like knives through paper, artillery units leapfrogged to provide constant fire support, and infantry followed with relentless precision. The Germans were disoriented, panicked, and retreating before they could mount a coherent defense. Eisenhower's officers crowded around their radios and maps, unable to hide their awe. One whispered, "He's not just fast, he's redefining warfare." Another added, "Everything we thought we knew about strategy is being rewritten in real time." Eisenhower remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. He had doubted Patton's methods, worried about overextension, feared the consequences of unbridled audacity. But the evidence was irrefutable. Patton's Third Army was a force of precision and speed that could shatter even the most disciplined enemy defenses. And yet, as Eisenhower considered the broader campaign, a new question arose. Could even Patton's genius survive the challenges that lay ahead? The German heartland was still formidable, with entrenched divisions, fortified cities, and a command structure desperate to reclaim lost ground. The man who had defied every expectation was about to face the ultimate test. August 16, 1944. The French countryside was a blur of motion. Tanks grinding through mud, artillery shells bursting in clouds of dirt, and the echoing calls of soldiers coordinating movements over crackling radios. Patton's Third Army had reached the outskirts of Argenton, and the German forces were on the brink of collapse. You could almost feel the electricity in the air, a tense mixture of anticipation, fear, and awe. Eisenhower watched from his command post as reports detailed the destruction of entire German formations. For weeks, he had wrestled with the paradox of Patton: reckless yet precise, audacious yet disciplined, unstoppable yet exposed. The man's methods had seemed like a dangerous gamble at first, but now in real time the gamble had become a masterstroke. Patton's speed had outflanked enemy reinforcements, cut supply lines, and forced retreats that were previously unimaginable. The turning point came with the encirclement of the German 7th Army near Falaise. Patton's forces, in a coordinated series of flanking maneuvers, sealed escape routes and cornered the enemy. Sherman tanks roared forward, infantry units advanced with surgical precision, and artillery rained destruction on any remaining resistance. German soldiers, exhausted and demoralized, surrendered in droves, their morale shattered by the relentless pressure of an army that refused to pause. Eisenhower felt a shift inside himself. All the doubts, the fears of overextension, the concerns over reckless audacity, they melted away under the weight of undeniable results. Patton had turned audacity into strategy, speed into dominance. He had proven that war could be waged differently, that momentum, aggression, and instinct could redefine the battlefield. And yet, even in triumph, Eisenhower's mind raced. Could this pace be maintained? Could Patton's genius continue to defy expectation without costing the Army dearly? Or was the Third Army racing toward a point where the rules of caution would finally reclaim their authority? August 18, 1944. The maps on Eisenhower's table were a mess of pins and colored strings, each one marking the astonishing progress of Patton's Third Army. You can almost hear the hum of the radio, the frantic scribbles of aides, the quiet mutters of officers trying to process what had just happened. Towns liberated ahead of schedule, German divisions shattered, entire regions freed in days rather than weeks. Eisenhower leaned back, finally letting himself absorb the full magnitude. For months, he had worried that Patton's aggression would leave his army exposed, worried that ambition might outrun logistics, worried that the Third Army might collapse under its own speed. But what he saw now was not recklessness. It was innovation. It was brilliance executed in real time. Patton's daring had created opportunities that careful planning could never have achieved. On the front, Sherman tanks continued their relentless push, cutting paths through hedgerows, crushing German counterattacks before they could form. Infantry units moved like shadows behind them, securing towns, capturing prisoners, and keeping up with a pace that left even seasoned officers gasping. Field artillery blasted fortified positions, engineers repaired bridges overnight, and supply convoys stretched across the countryside like lifelines to keep the momentum alive. Eisenhower's aides whispered among themselves, some in awe, some in disbelief. "He's unstoppable," one said. "He's changing the very nature of the campaign," said another. And Eisenhower quietly, almost to himself, nodded. The realization was crystal clear. Patton's audacity wasn't a liability. It was the weapon the Allies needed. And yet, even in this moment of clarity, a lingering question haunted him. How long could this brilliance endure? Could one man's relentless pace carry an entire army through the next phases of the war, across rivers, through fortified cities, and into the heart of Germany itself? Or was history about to demand that even Patton face a challenge that could finally match his genius? August 20, 1944. Sunlight pierced the morning mist over the roads leading to Chartres, illuminating the churned earth, wrecked vehicles, and hastily abandoned German positions. You can almost hear the steady rumble of Sherman tanks, the clatter of boots, and the barked orders of officers as Patton's columns surged forward. The Third Army was a living machine, armored, relentless, and terrifyingly fast. Eisenhower watched the reports arrive, unable to hide the tension and awe in equal measure. Patton had defied every prediction, every conservative plan, every expectation of what an army could accomplish. Villages were liberated before supply lines were fully established. German counterattacks were not just repelled, they were anticipated and crushed. Every step of the advance seemed to rewrite the rules of modern warfare. On the ground, Patton's leadership was visceral. He rode between units in his jeep, shouting encouragement, correcting maneuvers, and pushing forward with a singular vision. Sherman tanks roared past hedgerows, artillery units leapfrogged to maintain relentless pressure, and infantry closed in to secure towns with surgical precision. The Third Army wasn't just advancing, it was shaping the battlefield itself. Back at headquarters, Eisenhower's mind raced. He had doubted Patton's methods, feared overextension, worried about exposed flanks. But now he understood something vital. This was not recklessness. It was genius executed with audacity, discipline, and flawless timing. Patton had transformed audacity into strategy, instinct into operational mastery. Yet even as triumph unfolded, the tension remained. Could this pace be sustained across rivers, through fortified cities and deeper into enemy territory? Or was the Third Army, brilliant as it was, moving toward a point where even Patton's genius would be tested like never before? August 23, 1944. The sun had climbed high over the liberated towns of Normandy, casting long shadows across the rubble-strewn streets. You can almost hear the cheers of civilians, the clatter of tanks rolling through once-occupied villages, and the relentless murmur of communications lines buzzing with reports from the front. Patton's Third Army was not just advancing, it was unstoppable. Eisenhower sat alone for a moment, maps sprawled across the table, pens set aside, radio chatter filling the air. He could finally admit it, fully and without hesitation. Patton's methods, once feared as reckless, had redefined the very art of war. Where conventional commanders relied on caution, deliberation, and predictable timetables, Patton had struck with speed, precision, and unyielding audacity. Entire German formations had been shattered not by superior numbers, but by the relentless tempo and instinctive brilliance of a single man. Reports continued to flood in. Bridges seized before they could be destroyed, villages liberated before the enemy could regroup, entire battalions surrendered to units they hadn't even seen coming. Patton's audacity had become operational doctrine in motion, fast, decisive, and transformative. Eisenhower realized that he was witnessing history, a lesson in command that would echo far beyond Normandy. And yet, amid the triumph, a quiet tension lingered. The Third Army's pace was unprecedented, the risks immense. Could such audacity be sustained through the sieges to come, across rivers and into the heart of Germany? Or was this only the first act of a campaign that would test even Patton's genius to its limit? Eisenhower finally leaned back, a deep breath escaping him. He had doubted, he had feared, but now he understood. Patton was not reckless, he was revolutionary, and the Allies, for the first time, grasped the full power of a mind that refused to be constrained by convention.